The vast emptiness of space stretched beyond the observation windows of the UE Curiosity as Captain Sarah Chen stood at the center of the bridge, her arms behind her back. Her expression calm but alert, the soft hum of the ship's systems created a rhythm that matched her thoughts, which were racing faster than any FTL drive behind her. The ship's AI, known as Aria, processed streams of quantum sensor data with clinical precision until finally her voice cut through the silence like a whisper wrapped in code. Captain, we are detecting an unusual energy signature approximately 2.3 light years from our current position. Sarah raised an eyebrow, intrigued, and immediately requested more details. But Aria replied that the source did not match any known entry in the United Earth database, though the intensity and pattern strongly suggested an artificial origin. This was exactly the kind of anomaly that gave meaning to their deep space mission. So without hesitation, she ordered a course adjustment, and the crew of the Curiosity prepared for what could be humanity's first encounter with intelligent extraterrestrial life. As the ship changed direction, excitement and apprehension began to mount. In equal measure, humanity had long dreamed of the day they would find others in the cosmos, but they had also learned the hard way to temper their curiosity with preparedness and respect. The Curiosity was outfitted with the most advanced defense and communication systems Earth had ever developed, including experimental cloaking modules, high-resolution sensor arrays, and a universal translator built upon neural quantum architecture. It was a vessel designed not for conquest, but for connection. It represented Earth's cautious optimism that the universe might still hold wonders rather than only threats. As the ship drew closer to the energy signature, hours passed with little to report. But then Aria announced multiple unidentified vessels approaching at high speed. Their configuration, unlike anything in Earth's extensive records, the bridge crew moved into high-alert defensive systems, were placed on standby, and Sarah calmly instructed her team to follow first contact protocols even as the looming silhouettes of alien ships filled the holographic display. When visual contact was established, the alien vessels appeared vast and menacing, their structure aerodynamic yet brutal, adorned with protruding weapon pods and armor plating that reflected the surrounding starlight like liquid steel. The alien ships began transmitting a signal in an unrecognized language, but Aria quickly adapted and provided translation. Unknown vessel, you have entered sovereign territory of the Galactic Empire. Power down your systems and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will be met with immediate destruction. Sarah met the gaze of her crew, each one reflecting a spectrum of emotions: fear, awe, resolve. But no one moved to panic. Instead, they looked to their captain, who took a breath and gave the order to open a communication channel. With a calm voice, Sarah introduced herself as Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth ship Curiosity, and explained that their presence was unintentional, that humanity meant no harm, and welcomed the chance for peaceful dialogue. The alien voice responded with skepticism, unable to understand how humanity could possess such effective translation capabilities. As Aria explained their system, the alien commander insisted such technology was impossible. Not even the Galactic Empire had achieved it. The situation was clearly becoming more tense, and Commander Jack Rivera leaned toward Sarah, suggesting they prepare for a potential firefight. But Sarah had another idea. She asked Aria to prepare a demonstration, one that might level the psychological playing field. Moments later, Aria activated the ship's advanced holographic projection systems, which broadcast a false but visually flawless image of hundreds of massive human warships suddenly materializing around the Curiosity. From the Empire's perspective, they were now vastly outnumbered, and possibly outmatched chaos erupted over the alien communication channels, with their sensors unable to verify what they were seeing. The Galactic Empire's forces hesitated, and the commander demanded to know the meaning of this. Sarah replied not with threat, but with humor and calm, explaining that what they saw was merely a sample of what humanity could do, and that their goal remained peaceful interaction. The bluff worked. The alien ships withdrew slightly, no longer barking demands but requesting a renewed discussion. The tension on the bridge gave way to quiet disbelief and growing pride. Humanity had taken its first step onto the galactic stage, not with violence or desperation, but with creativity, discipline, and one perfectly executed illusion. As Sarah and her crew settled into the surreal reality of what had just happened, they understood that they were no longer just explorers on a mission. They were now ambassadors carrying the weight of their entire species into the unknown. Their actions would define humanity in the eyes of the galaxy, and Sarah was determined that those first impressions would be of a people who were intelligent, adaptable, and unwilling to back down when faced with overwhelming odds. As the Curiosity maintained position, surrounded by the still cautious Empire ships, Sarah instructed Arya to prepare full diplomatic protocols. They were going to need everything they had, not just in technology, but in empathy, patience, and ingenuity, because the next step was no longer just about survival or scientific discovery. It was about making a mark in the universe that would define who humans were and what kind of future they wanted to build among the stars. The tension aboard the UE Curiosity was palpable as the alien vessels of the Galactic Empire loomed closer. Their sleek designs and weapon-laden hulls made no effort to hide their intent. Though the human crew maintained their composure, years of training kicking in, as Captain Sarah Chen stood tall at the center of the bridge, her eyes fixed on the holographic display that now showed a fleet far larger and more intimidating than anything Earth had previously encountered. The alien voice returned over the comms, this time more forceful and commanding, repeating its demand for surrender and compliance. Sarah met the gaze of her crew, their silent questions hanging in the air. "What now? What do we do?" Her voice remained calm, steady, full of authority, as she ordered Arya to prepare the ship's full defensive capabilities, while reiterating to the alien ships that humanity was not seeking conflict and simply wished for dialogue and mutual understanding. But the reply came back laced with arrogance and disbelief. The Empire could not comprehend the idea of peaceful intentions from a technologically inferior species, their translators functioning only because of a technology they deemed impossible. They suspected a trap and, with growing impatience, began charging their weapon systems. Arya confirmed the rising energy signatures, and Commander Jack Rivera moved to raise shields, but Sarah lifted a hand, stopping him, her expression unreadable as she stared down the projection of the alien flagship. "We are not going to escalate," she said quietly, "at least not yet." Then she turned to Arya, her voice sharper. "Now suggest a solution. We can't win a fight against a fleet that size, not with firepower, but perhaps with something else." The AI responded instantly, suggesting a psychological tactic, one that could demonstrate human capability without actual violence. Sarah's lips curled into a slight smile, appreciating the boldness of the plan she gave the order, and within moments, Arya activated the Curiosity's experimental holographic projection systems, not just a trick, but a masterstroke of human ingenuity that generated the appearance of a full Earth fleet, appearing out of nowhere, completely surrounding the Empire's ships. The alien sensors went wild, unable to verify the sudden influx of energy signatures. The illusion was that complete panic rippled through their formations, their orderly movement disrupted by doubt and hesitation. Then the comms lit up again. The once commanding voice now shook with uncertainty. "What is this? How is this possible? Are these reinforcements or deception?" Sarah responded with confidence, her voice tinged with quiet amusement. "This is only a glimpse," she said, "of what humanity is capable of. Seek peace, but we will not be intimidated. Now shall we try that dialogue again?" The effect was immediate. The alien fleet pulled back slightly, still surrounding them, but now with noticeably less aggression. Sarah turned to Jack, who let out a breath he had been holding the entire time that was either brilliant or insane. He whispered. Sarah didn't answer, but her posture said, everything bluff or not, it had worked. The ship's bridge erupted into cautious celebration, a wave of disbelief, relief, and growing pride sweeping through the crew. They had just stared down a galactic superpower and walked away intact. The next hours were a blur of communications, Aria working tirelessly to maintain the illusion, while the crew initiated first contact procedures under a new lens, no longer as unknown trespassers, but as possible equals. Sarah and her officers crafted their responses carefully, avoiding any sign of weakness, while still extending the olive branch of cooperation and knowledge. The Empire, however, remained skeptical. They demanded a show of good faith, something tangible, not another illusion. Their Admiral Zaxor, an imposing reptilian being with cold, golden eyes, insisted on boarding rights to inspect the human ship, a request Sarah firmly but respectfully denied, citing security concerns and mutual respect. Instead, she offered a counter-proposal to demonstrate Earth's capabilities by repairing and upgrading one of the Empire's damaged vessels. Curiosity was quickly replaced by cautious acceptance, and soon Sarah and a small team were escorted to a crippled Empire scout ship. The interior was unlike anything human engineers had worked with before, a labyrinth of alien technology, unfamiliar systems, and pulsating energy conduits. But Sarah's team got to work without hesitation, deploying advanced nano-repair systems, adaptive AI nodes, and quantum processors that interfaced with the ship's central core. The Empire engineers watched in stunned silence as their failing systems came alive. Revitalized, transformed within hours, the scout ship had not only been repaired, but upgraded its propulsion systems, optimized shielding, enhanced, and a rudimentary AI assistant installed. Admiral Zaxor himself arrived, visibly shaken by the change, and demanded to know what had been done. Sarah smiled, simply stating, "We adapted. We solved the problem and gave it back better than we found it." Aria confirmed a 500% increase in system efficiency, new capabilities unlocked, and old limitations removed. The Empire officers whispered among themselves, their voices carrying disbelief and awe. Zaxor's usual prideful demeanor began to crack, replaced by something that looked very much like respect. He asked how such feats were possible, and Sarah responded with honesty, telling him that humanity had always faced impossible odds and survived by being adaptable, inventive, and unrelentingly determined. What the Empire saw as unimaginable, humanity saw as a challenge to overcome, and so we do. Sarah concluded, gesturing to the ship. "This is only a taste of what we can offer, not just technology, but partnership." Zaxor was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded slowly and offered a rare admission of misjudgment. Sarah accepted it with grace, but also reminded him that humanity might be new to the galactic stage. But they were not naive as they departed back to the Curiosity. The atmosphere between the two crews had shifted, no longer just tense competitors, now potential collaborators. Back aboard the human vessel, Sarah called a meeting with her senior staff and reminded them all that while they had earned the Empire's attention and possibly their respect, the game was far from over. Now more than ever, every move they made would shape how humanity was perceived in the galaxy, and she intended to make sure they played their cards wisely, because they were not just representing Earth anymore, they were carrying the torch for what kind of civilization humanity could be, one built not on domination or fear, but on ingenuity, resilience, and the courage to face the unknown with boldness and integrity. Back aboard the UE Curiosity, the crew had barely begun to relax from their first confrontation with the Galactic Empire. When new challenges started to unfold, the news of their technological bluff and successful repair of the Empire's scout ship had begun to ripple through the galactic communications network. Even within the tightly controlled structure of the Empire, word spread quickly, and with it, curiosity, suspicion, and a growing desire to learn more about these humans who had emerged from the unknown and defied expectations. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, her eyes fixed on the formation of Empire ships that now flanked the Curiosity, not in aggression but in what appeared to be cautious curiosity. Next to her stood Commander Jack Rivera, also watching the silent dance of diplomacy beginning to unfold out there in the vast emptiness of space. "It's hard to believe this started with one strange energy signature," he murmured. Sarah nodded slowly, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. What they had thought would be a scientific expedition had transformed into the most critical diplomatic mission in human history, just as she was about to speak. Aria's calm voice broke through the moment, informing them of an incoming transmission from Admiral Zaxor himself. Sarah took a deep breath, handed the mug back to Jack, and walked with purpose to the main conference room, where the Admiral's towering holographic form soon appeared. His posture was stiffer than before, his tone more serious. The High Council of the Empire had reviewed her team's demonstration, and while intrigued, they remained skeptical of human intentions. They wanted something real, a demonstration of capability, not illusion and not on human terms. Sarah understood the importance of the moment. This was their chance to move beyond defense and posturing, and into genuine negotiation. She replied with quiet confidence that they were prepared to show the Empire something tangible, something that would benefit them as well. But on one condition: the demonstration would take place on an Empire ship, preferably one in need of repair, so that they could truly show what humanity's technology and ingenuity could accomplish. There was a moment of tense silence before Zaxor agreed, pointing them to a scout vessel recently damaged during an asteroid field survey. A transport was arranged, and Sarah assembled a small hand-picked team of engineers, scientists, and systems specialists. Aria assisted in compiling tools, data, and schematics that might be useful once aboard the Empire vessel. The human team immediately went to work. The interior was dark, jagged, and humming with damaged systems. The air was thick with the scent of burning circuits and ionized metal. Empire engineers watched warily, their reptilian faces unreadable, as the humans began setting up their equipment. Sarah moved directly to the core interface, a pillar of alien technology glowing weakly with fluctuating energy. She placed a small device at its base, a thin disk no larger than her palm, crafted using nanobot architecture and quantum processing. It began syncing with the foreign system in seconds. Once integration began, the transformation was almost instant. Lights, stabilized data streams recalibrated, and damaged conduits began to restructure themselves under the guidance of self-replicating repair systems. The Empire crew stood stunned, unable to look away, as their ship began to function better than it ever had. The AI companion RIA patched into the ship's systems, remotely assisting with diagnostics and optimizing subroutines. Within an hour, the ship's performance metrics had jumped dramatically. When Admiral Zaxor arrived aboard to witness the result, his disbelief was written across his sharp features. His voice wavered as he asked, "What have you done?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "We did what we always do, Admiral. We solved a problem. The ship now boasted faster than light travel improvements, advanced shielding redundancies, and an early-stage AI support module. Zaxor ordered a full diagnostic, and when the results returned, confirming a 500% efficiency increase, even the most skeptical engineers among his team were left speechless. The Empire had never seen upgrades like this, not from any of its member species, not even from its most advanced. Research divisions, and the fact that it came from a species they had considered primitive only days ago shook them to their core. Zaxor turned back to Sarah, his voice no longer edged with suspicion, but with something close to reverence. "This technology is beyond us. How have you achieved this?" Sarah answered with honesty and a steady tone, explaining that Earth was not an easy place to survive, and that humanity had been forced by nature itself to become problem solvers, to find ways through impossible situations, and to build tools that would not only save lives but change the way they lived. "We don't accept limitations," she said. "We reframe them as puzzles to be solved, challenges to overcome, and when our survival depends on innovation, we always find a way." She gestured to the revitalized ship and added, "This is only a fraction of what we can do." The Admiral stood in thoughtful silence, as if seeing the humans not as intruders or inferiors, but as something entirely unexpected allies, perhaps equals, maybe even future leaders. Back on the Curiosity, Sarah debriefed her team and acknowledged the importance of what they had just done. They had not just fixed a broken ship. They had rewritten the power dynamic between their two civilizations. It was clear now that the Empire would never again view humanity as a minor species. Their technological edge had earned a measure of respect and perhaps fear, but it was up to them to decide what came next. As the crew gathered in the central chamber to discuss their next steps, Aria reported an influx of messages from various factions within the Empire, leaders, scientists, and even military officials, requesting dialogue, technical assistance, and in some cases, mentorship. Humanity had become the wild card in a galaxy that had grown too used to dominance and predictability. Sarah looked around the room at her team and spoke with quiet certainty. "We've just opened a door that cannot be closed. Now every move we make, every word we speak will shape how the galaxy sees us. We need to choose carefully, but we also need to lead by example, because we didn't just come out here to explore, we came to prove that we belong among the stars. And today, I think we did that together." Her words resonated deeply with her crew, because they all understood this was no longer a science mission or a political encounter. This was history unfolding in real time, and they were at the center of it. Not because they had the biggest guns or the largest ships, but because they had the courage to reach beyond fear and show what humanity was truly capable of in the face of the unknown. The transformation of the Empire's scout ship had triggered more than just admiration. It had set off a wave of curiosity across the Galactic Empire, unlike anything seen in generations, as news of the humans' technological prowess spread through diplomatic channels, scientific enclaves, and military command posts. Requests for contact began to pour into the UE Curiosity from every corner of the Empire. The ship's communication systems buzzed constantly with new messages, new inquiries, new invitations, each demanding attention from the mysterious civilization that had turned a crippled vessel into a marvel of engineering overnight. Captain Sarah Chen stood at the center of this storm, managing each communication with the poise of a seasoned diplomat, though only days before she had been an explorer charting the stars. Now she was the de facto ambassador for the entire human race. Aria kept her updated with hourly reports outlining each incoming request and ranking them by urgency and strategic importance. In just 1 hour, 47 new inquiries had been logged, many of them from planets or research institutions seeking insight into human systems and methodologies. Others were more cautious, veiled in political language and bureaucratic maneuvering, but they all said the same thing in different tones. "Who are you, and what else can you do?" Commander Jack Rivera remarked with a half-smile that it seemed humanity was suddenly the most popular guest at the galactic party. Sarah responded with a nod, but her face remained serious. "Popularity brings pressure," she said. "We need to be very deliberate about who we talk to and what we share." The bridge crew agreed with unspoken consensus. Aria confirmed that Admiral Zaxor's flagship had maintained position near the Curiosity, but new data showed multiple other Empire fleets moving toward their location, likely dispatched by high-ranking officials who now wanted to see the humans for themselves. Sarah called a senior staff meeting, immediately gathering her command crew and lead scientists in the main conference room. The mood was one of careful excitement. Everyone knew they had earned the attention of the most powerful civilization in the galaxy, but no one knew exactly what would happen next. Sarah began the meeting with clarity and gravity, outlining the crossroad they had reached. She explained that the decisions made in the coming days would affect not only their current standing with the Empire, but the future of humanity's role in the galaxy as a whole. The room quieted as she laid out the options. Dr. Aravos, head of scientific development, spoke first, her voice full of enthusiasm from a purely scientific perspective. She said the potential here is unprecedented. The Empire's knowledge base spans millennia. Their archives contain data we could use to leap forward by centuries in medicine, energy, ecology, even space-time theory. Security Chief Marcus Tanner offered a different view. "We've impressed them, but we're still one ship against dozens." He said, "We cannot forget that we are still guests here. If not potential threats to their status quo, there will be factions that want us gone or controlled." His warning settled over the group like a shadow. Sarah acknowledged both sides of the argument and then presented her decision. She proposed a limited technology exchange, focusing strictly on non-military sectors. The humans would offer breakthroughs in medicine, clean energy, terraforming, and education. In return, they would request full access to the Empire's scientific and historical databases. This trade would allow Earth to advance significantly while minimizing the risk of their own systems being reverse-engineered for hostile use. More importantly, she added, "We will not simply give them our technology, we will teach them how to develop it themselves, creating partnerships, not dependence. If we do this right, we build real relationships across the Empire, not just with their top brass, but with the scientists, engineers, and people who want something better." Jack Rivera finished her thought with a smile. "Give a man a fish, feed him for a day. Teach him to fish, feed him for a lifetime." "Exactly," Sarah said. "And this way we showcase our value without giving away the very edge that makes us important." The strategy resonated with the crew, and Aria began drafting a formal proposal to be presented to Admiral Zaxor and the High Council. While the team broke to finalize logistics, Sarah remained seated alone for a moment, staring at the stars through the wide viewport. She could see the glint of Empire ships drifting nearby, silent but not idle, watching. Waiting, calculating. A soft chime indicated an incoming high-priority communication. Admiral Zaxor was requesting a private audience. Sarah granted it, and minutes later, the holographic projection of the Admiral appeared in the conference room. His posture was different. Now less rigid, more contemplative. "Captain Chen," he began, "I have reviewed your proposal, and I must admit, it has stirred considerable debate among our leadership. Some see opportunity, others see risk. I, however, see something else, something rare." Sarah leaned in, curious. "What do you see, Admiral?" "Redemption," he said quietly, and she blinked. Taken aback, "The Empire has ruled for millions of years, but in that time we have stagnated, grown comfortable and complacent. We have ruled through dominance and fear, but that has cost us growth, the curiosity, adaptability, and innovation that once drove our expansion have faded. You humans remind us of that spirit, that hunger to discover and evolve." His tone was sincere, his eyes reflecting something more than politics. They held a deep recognition of shared purpose. Sarah listened intently, her mind still spinning from the gravity of his words. Zaxor continued, "I have spoken to a group of like-minded officials across the Empire, and we would like to explore the formation of a new structure, a galactic federation with humanity as a founding member, not as subjects, not as subordinates, but as equals." Sarah's breath caught the implications of such an alliance, were staggering centuries of dominance being reimagined into partnership, and Earth playing a central role in that vision. She asked why now and why humanity. Zaxor's answer came without hesitation, "Because you reminded us what the stars are for." He said, "Exploration, wonder, cooperation." We had forgotten those things. Sarah stood quietly, then extended her hand in a gesture of agreement, a human tradition but a meaningful one. The Admiral grasped it carefully, as if unsure how to hold something so symbolic and yet so fragile. And in that moment, Sarah knew that the future had changed once again, not with a shot fired or a threat issued, but with a conversation and a choice. Humanity was no longer simply a visitor in this galaxy. They were now helping shape its future. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, disagreements, setbacks. But the foundation had been laid, and it had been built not on power or intimidation, but on shared potential and a vision of what could be created together. From that moment forward, the stars themselves seemed to shine just a little brighter, as if welcoming humanity into the fold, not as strangers, but as full and equal players in the vast and boundless game of galactic civilization. 5 years had passed since the historic encounter between the UE Curiosity and the Galactic Empire, and in that relatively short span of time, the galaxy had transformed in ways no one could have imagined. At the center of this monumental shift stood humanity, a once obscure species, from a distant spiral arm of the galaxy, now a key player in an emerging age of cooperation, discovery, and renewal. The Galactic Federation, formed in the wake of the Empire's decision to abandon its centuries of domination, was no longer just an idea, it was a reality. Its headquarters stood as a gleaming, architectural marvel floating above a neutral world chosen for its symbolism, a place where no Empire flag had ever flown. Within its grand halls, delegates from hundreds of species moved through its corridors, each one representing a former subject, now a sovereign member, each one possessing a voice in the decisions that would shape the future of their corner of the stars. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Sarah Chen, once the captain of the UE Curiosity, now the chief diplomat for the United Earth delegation, her days filled with negotiations, strategy sessions, cultural exchange summits, and countless moments of delicate diplomacy beside her. Moved Admiral Zaxor, now the Federation's Chief of Interspecies Relations, a title that spoke to the sweeping changes he had embraced and helped usher in. Over the years, his once intimidating presence had softened into one of respect and even camaraderie between species who had once feared his name. The two of them, Sarah and Zaxor, had become the living embodiment of what the Federation stood for: evolution through unity, strength through cooperation, and progress through mutual understanding. As they stood at the center of the main chamber, Zaxor turned to Sarah, his deep voice carrying the weight of both memory and admiration. "Who would have thought," he mused, "that your small ship wandering into our patrol zone would change everything?" Sarah smiled softly. "Certainly not me," she replied. "I was just trying not to start an intergalactic incident. Instead, we sparked a movement." Their conversation was briefly interrupted as Dr. Aravos, now head of the Federation's Scientific Council, approached her eyes wide with excitement and a holographic tablet clutched tightly in her hand. "Ambassador Admiral, you need to see this," she said. "The results from the Arcturus project have just come in." They followed her to the central display, which sprang to life, revealing a swirling image of the Arcturus star system, a once dying system doomed by gravitational instability that had been revitalized through the joint efforts of human scientists and Skur engineers using phase shifting and stellar lattice technology. Sarah watched as Aravos explained the implications: billions of lives saved across the planets orbiting Arcturus, now given a future instead of extinction. The room around them filled with murmurs of amazement and admiration. Zaxor laid a scaled hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Another miracle courtesy of your people," he said, with genuine warmth. "You continue to surprise us." Sarah nodded, but her expression was tinged with thoughtfulness. "We have come far, but we are still just beginning. Not everyone agrees with this new path," as if echoing her thoughts. A sudden commotion at the hall's entrance drew their attention. A group of protesters had bypassed security, carrying banners and shouting slogans, denouncing the Federation, accusing humanity of disrupting the natural order, and demanding a return to the old ways. Their presence sparked tension among the delegates, many of whom stood in alarmed security, began to move in, but Sarah held up her hand. "Wait," she said, "let them speak. This is what we stand for, the right to be heard, even in dissent." She walked toward the protesters slowly, deliberately, her posture open and non-threatening. "I understand your concerns," she began, her voice strong but empathetic. "Change is difficult, especially when it affects entire civilizations. The Empire ruled with order and predictability, but also with fear and suppression. What we offer is more chaotic. Yes, but also more alive, more full of possibility." She gestured toward the Arcturus display. "We did not bring destruction, we brought renewal where there was decay. We created hope where there was fear. We now offer dialogue." The lead protester, an aging war veteran, stepped forward, glaring at her with skepticism. "Your words sound nice," he said, "but words do not feed the hungry or protect the weak." Sarah nodded. "You are right, and that is why we have created the Federation Relief Corps, to provide aid where it is needed most, to protect vulnerable worlds and rebuild what was lost. That is why we have opened our universities and research facilities to all species, so that everyone can grow together, not apart. That is why every world in the Federation, regardless of size or past, has an equal vote in how we move forward together." She met the eyes of each protester one by one. "The Empire ruled through fear. We choose to lead through hope. Yes, it is harder. Yes, it is slower. But it is also stronger because it is shared, not imposed." The room slowly quieted the anger of the protesters, giving way to reluctant reflection. Zaxor stepped forward, adding his voice to hers. "I once believed as you do," he said. "I believed in order above all else. But what we have built here has already surpassed anything we achieved. Under the old ways, the progress we have made in 5 years outpaces centuries under the Empire. This is not just an alliance, it is a rebirth." The protesters were eventually escorted out, but not with force. Instead, with invitations to learn more, to engage, to participate. Later, Sarah found herself back by the observation window, joined once again by her old friend, Jack Rivera, now captain of the Curiosity, still exploring deep space, still reporting new wonders back to Federation Command. He looked at her with a boyish grin and said, "Quite a speech. Ambassador, you have not lost your touch." Sarah laughed lightly. "Just doing my job." "Jack, how is the exploration?" Jack's eyes lit up. "You would not believe the things we are finding, new civilizations, New phenomena, entire regions of space we never even imagined existed, and the best part, we are meeting them as allies, not conquerors. Sarah took a moment to let that sink in, realizing that in reshaping the galaxy, humanity had reshaped itself not through conquest or dominance, but by embracing its strengths: curiosity, adaptability, resilience, and hope. And as the Federation president, a wise and ancient being from a species older than most known civilizations, began his address. Sarah listened with quiet pride. Friends, he began, we stand at the dawn of a new era, an age of shared purpose and boundless possibility, and we owe so much of this to those who dared to challenge the old and imagine the new, to those who taught us that being different is not a threat, but a gift. A cheer rose from the gathered delegates. Sarah closed her eyes just for a moment, breathing it all in: the sounds, the lights, the feeling of belonging in something vast and meaningful. When she opened them again, she was ready to continue guiding humanity forward, ready to face the challenges ahead. Because the stars were still calling, and humanity was no longer alone in answering that call. They were part of something greater now, something enduring and alive, and the adventure, as always, was only just beginning. In the 5 years since humanity's first contact with the Galactic Empire, the universe had shifted dramatically, and though the Galactic Federation was now a living reality with delegates from hundreds of species and a structure built upon mutual cooperation, not all voices across the stars were singing in harmony deep within the polished chambers of the Federation's central hall, where shimmering banners of unity waved and multilingual exchanges filled the air. A different sound occasionally echoed: discontent, concern, resistance. These undercurrents, though quieter than the initial momentum of peace, had begun to grow louder as some worlds, particularly those that had thrived under the rigid order of the old empire, began to push back against the Federation's ideals. The shift was felt most strongly by Ambassador Sarah Chen, whose once exploratory mission had now transformed into a long and complex diplomatic responsibility. Her days were filled with balancing hope and caution, pride and pragmatism. She had watched the Federation thrive in countless ways, from stabilizing stars to opening shared universities, but she had also watched as skepticism crept back into conversations, as tensions flared between old enemies, now asked to share a seat at the same table today. That tension became undeniable as a group of protesters burst through security at the main entrance to the Federation Hall, carrying signs and banners and chanting slogans that accused humanity of destabilizing the galaxy. Their shouts filled the chamber, echoing off the polished walls and silencing ongoing discussions. The delegates paused, startled, some fearful, others angry, and security rushed forward. But Sarah raised her hand and signaled them to stand down. "We let them speak," she said softly. "This is what democracy looks like." As the protesters marched closer, she stepped forward with unwavering calmness. She wore the formal ambassadorial robes of Earth, but her voice carried the authority of someone who had earned her place not through power, but through action. "I understand your fears," she said, looking directly at the leader of the group, who appeared to be a former Imperial soldier, his eyes still sharp despite the years etched into his face. He glared back. "Words are easy," he said, his voice steady and bitter, "but our worlds are suffering under this new order. You speak of peace, but what of protection? What of security under the Empire? We had structure under the Federation, we have chaos." Sarah stood firm. "I do not deny that the transition has been difficult. Change always is, and no system is perfect. But I ask you to consider what we have gained in these 5 years." She gestured toward a nearby holographic display, which showed the Arcturus system, a once dying star now stabilized through Federation technology saving billions of lives and unlocking a new future. That kind of achievement did not exist under the Empire, she continued, where once we expanded through domination, now we advance through collaboration. The Federation has established the Relief Corps to bring food and medical aid to struggling planets. We have created cross-cultural, educational systems to give every species access to knowledge, not just the powerful ones. And yes, the work is messy, the path unclear, but it is real and it belongs to all of us. Not just the strongest. The protester paused, his mouth opening as if to speak, but Sarah did not let the silence linger. We are not here to silence you, she said. We are here to listen, to learn, and to grow together. Even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is hard, because that is how something new is built. Not with fear, but with trust. Another voice rose from the protest group, a younger delegate from a former mining colony who had known only hardship under the old empire. She asked what guarantees they had that the Federation would not become another tool for exploitation. Sarah's eyes softened. You have my word, and more than that, you have the oversight of every member world, including your own. Our decisions are made in the open, with every voice heard, every vote counted. That is not just talk. It is how we built this from the start. Zaxor stepped forward, then towering as always, but now moving with the ease of someone who no longer saw himself as a conqueror, but as a contributor. I once stood where you stand, he said, his voice cutting through the room. I believed the Empire's strength made us unbreakable, but that strength came at a cost, and it blinded us to the future. The humans reminded us of what we had forgotten: the power of innovation, the value of perspective, and the importance of hope. In 5 years, we have made more progress than in centuries, and not because we followed the old path, but because we dared to leave it behind. The room slowly quieted. The anger in the protesters' eyes gave way to contemplation, and the Federation guards stepped back, giving space rather than pushing them away. It was in that moment that Sarah understood the deeper truth that had emerged over these years. They had not simply built a new government or a council. They had created a space for dialogue, for disagreement, for honest growth. And that was more powerful than any ship or weapon. Later that day, as the hall returned to its usual pace, Sarah returned to the observation deck, where the stars stretched beyond the massive glass panels, and the lights of nearby Federation ships flickered like fireflies against the dark. Jack Rivera, now captain of the Curiosity, joined her, his face carrying a familiar mix of pride and worry. I heard about the protest, he said, his voice casual but attentive. I imagine it won't be the last. Sarah nodded. Probably not, but we handled it with honesty and respect, and that matters more than putting them down. We have to keep showing them that this is not the Empire in new clothes. This is something better. Jack offered a half smile. And you think they're starting to believe that? Sarah turned her gaze back to the stars. Some of them are, and that's a start. Just then, Arya appeared in a quiet shimmer, her voice as warm and precise as ever. Ambassador, new exploratory vessels from Sector 9 have returned early. They report contact with a new species not previously catalogued. No hostility has been reported, but there are cultural anomalies that require attention. Sarah straightened her posture and turned back toward the command room. Notify the Federation Council, prepare a cultural team, and tell Captain Rivera to ready the Curiosity for diplomatic escort if we are going to meet someone new. We do it the same way we always have, together. Jack laughed softly and followed her out the stars, waiting once again, just as they always had. And in that moment, the future of the Federation felt not just possible, but inevitable, not because of strength or fear, but because of people willing to walk into discomfort with open hands and open minds. That was the legacy humanity had forged, not by conquering the galaxy, but by inviting it to the table and showing there was another way forward, one where even protest had a place and where every voice mattered. The Galactic Federation was still in its infancy, a young and evolving alliance shaped by the bold ideas and shared dreams of civilizations that had once known only hierarchy, dominance, and submission. At the center of its founding stood humanity, a species that had arrived on the galactic stage, not with superior numbers or overwhelming force, but with something far more disruptive: the ability to adapt, innovate, and imagine a different future, one not built on conquest, but on cooperation. In the main hall of the Federation headquarters, where interspecies agreements were debated and signed, Ambassador Sarah Chen, now a figure of quiet yet undeniable influence, moved through the crowd of delegates with practiced ease. Beside her walked Admiral Zaxor, the once feared enforcer of the Galactic Empire, now transformed into a respected voice of balance and reform. Both had been key figures in building this new order, and both knew it was still fragile beneath the optimism and architectural beauty of the Federation's chambers. Tensions simmered. Not everyone believed in this vision. Some had accepted the Federation reluctantly. Others feared what it represented: a break from tradition, a loss of control, and most of all, a future they could not dominate. But amid the political maneuvering and ideological disagreements, there was real progress, and Sarah was determined to protect it. As she reviewed a stack of proposals submitted for the next council session, a soft alert echoed through the chamber. Aria, the ever-efficient AI that had once served only the UE, Curiosity, now integrated throughout the Federation's core systems, announced a priority request. Admiral Zaxor is requesting an urgent meeting aboard the Curiosity. Sarah raised an eyebrow, intrigued, and instructed that preparations be made within minutes. Zaxor boarded the ship, his expression unreadable as he entered the familiar command deck where so much history had already been written. Captain Chen, he began, though the title no longer matched her diplomatic role. It had become something of a tradition between them. I have come to speak about something that may reshape not just our two peoples, but the galaxy itself. Sarah gestured for him to sit. Go on. Admiral Zaxor hesitated, his gaze sweeping across the deck before settling back on her. Your recent proposal regarding the technological education exchange has sparked debate far beyond what we expected. Some view it as a gift, others a threat. But I see it as something else, an opportunity for redemption. Sarah studied him carefully. Redemption. He nodded slowly. The Empire stood for millions of years, and during that time, we grew stagnant. We believed strength came from control and order. But in doing so, we lost what truly made us great: the curiosity to learn, the humility to listen, the courage to trust. He leaned forward. Your people have reminded us of those values. You challenge us not with your weapons, but with your principles. And now a growing number of us wish to formalize something greater. Not just an alliance, but a federation built on equality, shared leadership, and long-term vision. Sarah's mind raced with the implications. Such a step would mean rewriting the very foundations of interstellar politics, but it also represented everything she and her crew had worked toward. Still, she asked, why humanity? Why now? Zaxor answered without hesitation, because in the face of our arrogance, you did not retaliate. You negotiated in the shadow of our power. You stood firm. And instead of seeking conquest, you offered knowledge and collaboration. Sarah felt a wave of quiet pride, and with it, the weight of responsibility. If they were to move forward, it had to be with care, thoughtfulness, and mutual respect. She agreed to take the proposal to the Federation Council, and from there, a new chapter would begin. In the days that followed, meetings were held, plans were drafted, and declarations revised. The new proposal outlined a Galactic Federation Council, with representatives elected not by military strength or historical rank, but by population and merit. It included provisions for joint scientific endeavors, educational infrastructure, cultural preservation, and shared defense, not as a means of domination but as mutual protection. When the council finally gathered for the official vote, tensions ran high. Sarah stood before the assembly with Zaxor at her side and presented the vision not as something dictated by Earth, but as a shared evolution. The hall held its breath as the votes were tallied, and when the final result was announced, the chamber erupted in applause and astonishment. The proposal had passed overwhelmingly. A new Galactic Federation was born, and humanity was officially recognized not just as a participant, but as a founding member. The moment was not marked by fireworks or grand speeches, but by a quiet sense of history unfolding. Sarah returned to her quarters that evening and stood by the observation window watching the distant stars with a mixture of awe and reflection. Aria's voice broke the silence gently. "Ambassador Wood, you like a status report?" She smiled. "Not right now, Aria, just a moment to take it all in." The following weeks were a blur of action and coordination. The Federation infrastructure expanded rapidly. Human experts began working alongside alien engineers to upgrade old planetary systems, advance medical care, and teach the core principles of open research and sustainable development. It was not about giving technology away, but about building lasting capacity. Across cultures, Sarah traveled frequently, meeting with local leaders, addressing fears, and mediating disputes, always carrying the message that the Federation was not another empire. It was a promise of shared potential. One day she found herself on a once impoverished mining world that under the old empire had been stripped bare and left in ruin. Now it buzzed with activity as terraforming teams restored its ecosystem. Education centers opened their doors to local youth, and clean water flowed for the first time in generations. A young girl approached Sarah and handed her a flower strange in shape and glowing faintly in the low light. "Thank you," she said in halting galactic standard. Sarah crouched beside her and smiled. "No, thank you for showing us what we are fighting for that night." Back aboard the Curiosity, she shared the story with Jack Rivera, who laughed and said, "Who would have thought we'd get this far from dodging alien fleets to handing out flowers in Federation schools? You ever think about where this is all going?" Sarah looked out the viewport. The stars stretched endlessly ahead. "I think we are just getting started, Jack. And for once, I believe we are heading somewhere worth going together." They stood there for a while in silence, the ship drifting gently in orbit around a world they had helped heal. The legacy of conflict was still there, scars that would take time to fade. But in their place, something new was growing: connection, hope, purpose. Humanity had not changed the galaxy with force, but by showing it a different way forward. And in doing so, they had become something more than explorers, more than diplomats. They had become stewards of the future, and the stars above them seemed to shimmer a little brighter in recognition of the path they had chosen, to walk not alone but side by side, with countless others ready to build a galaxy worth living in for everyone. The Galactic Federation was no longer just a hopeful idea, formed in the ashes of an outdated empire. It had become a dynamic living body of cooperation, a platform where voices once silenced by tyranny were now given equal weight, where former enemies sat side by side, drafting treaties rather than battle plans. 5 years after the initial contact between the UE Curiosity and the Galactic Empire, humanity found itself not only accepted into the galactic fold, but embraced as a guiding force, a catalyst that had transformed the very structure of interstellar relations in ways that still amazed many of its citizens and confounded its skeptics. In the heart of Federation space, within the polished stone and crystal chambers of the Central Assembly, the atmosphere was charged with cautious optimism as debates shifted from survival and territory to ethics, sustainability, and progress. Ambassador Sarah Chen, now a seasoned diplomat, moved through these chambers. With quiet confidence, her presence greeted with respect. Across a broad spectrum of species and cultures, the once unfamiliar faces of distant civilizations were now colleagues, partners, even friends. It had taken time, careful negotiation, and more than a few moments of doubt, but the foundation they had laid was solid. Sarah had just concluded a session regarding planetary rehabilitation grants when Aria's soft voice cut into her thoughts with an alert. Ambassador, a new priority transmission has arrived from the Federation outpost in the Telvanni system. A species previously unknown has initiated contact. They are requesting assistance rather than protection. Preliminary scans show signs of post-conflict devastation with critical needs for infrastructure and medical aid. Sarah paused, processing the report and feeling a familiar spark that had never quite left her since the days she first stood aboard the bridge of the Curiosity. This was why they had built the Federation, not just to prevent war, but to answer calls like this with empathy and action. Notify the Federation Council, she said, and inform Captain Rivera that the Curiosity will lead the response team. As her team mobilized, she took a moment to reflect, standing by the massive viewport that overlooked the stars, each one a possible story waiting to unfold, each one a challenge or a chance. The call from Telvanni came at a delicate time. Not everyone was comfortable with the pace of the Federation's expansion. Several former Imperial core worlds still clung to traditions of isolation and superiority, and a small but vocal bloc within the Assembly had begun campaigning for tighter regulations on technology sharing and humanitarian deployment, fearing cultural dilution or strategic vulnerability. Sarah understood their caution, but she also believed in something deeper. The Federation could not simply exist as a monument to past victories. It had to move forward. It had to live up to its ideals, or risk becoming no different than the empire it had replaced. As the Curiosity prepared for launch, Sarah and her staff reviewed the Telvanni data. The planet showed signs of having recently overthrown an authoritarian regime. Its cities still recovering from orbital bombardments, its atmosphere scarred by industrial war, its people fragmented and leaderless. What struck Sarah most was not the damage, but the signal itself. It had not been a cry for rescue. It had been a message of invitation. "We have heard what you built. We want to learn how." Sarah read those words over and over. They spoke to the core of everything they had worked for. Not dominance, not dependence, but curiosity and the desire to build something new together. When the Curiosity arrived in orbit around Telvanni, the images were sobering: broken skylines, once glorious monuments reduced to rubble, desperate camps gathered around makeshift shelters and water purifiers. Sarah stood in the command chamber, her face lit by the glow of the planet below, and gave her orders. "We lead with aid, no weapons, no intimidation, no flags. We show them who we are by what we do." Jack Rivera nodded, readying his team, and with that, the Federation's newest outreach mission began. They deployed solar generators, set up clean water systems, repaired hospitals, taught basic engineering principles using local materials, and above all, listened. They listened to stories of pain, of survival, of resistance, and of hope. The Telvanni people responded with a mixture of awe and gratitude, especially when they learned that the people helping them were not conquerors, not former masters, but volunteers from dozens of worlds, many of whom had once been oppressed themselves. Among the volunteers was a young engineer from a world that had suffered under the Empire's industrial extraction programs, and he said something that stuck with Sarah for the rest of her life. He said, "I used to think help always came with chains. Now I know it can come with open hands and a shared future." When the Federation delegation departed weeks later, the Telvanni leadership asked for something simple. Not weapons, not ships, not protection. They asked for teachers. Sarah returned to the assembly, and presented her report, not just in numbers of tons of aid delivered or miles of infrastructure repaired, but in stories of human kindness, alien solidarity, and the spark of self-determined rebirth. The Federation voted unanimously to establish a permanent cultural and educational presence on Telvanni, and Sarah ended the session with a reminder that what they had done was not charity. It was partnership. In the weeks that followed, more missions were launched, some successful, some complicated, but all driven by the same principle. That strength lies not in the power to control, but in the willingness to share and to learn. As Sarah sat one evening alone in her office, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The galaxy had changed, and humanity had played a role in that transformation, not by being the most powerful, not by being the most advanced, but by being willing to step into the unknown with courage, humility, and vision. And perhaps that is the real lesson, one not just for distant stars, but for us here on Earth. Because in a world still struggling with inequality, conflict, and mistrust, the story of the Federation reminds us that lasting change does not come from imposing our will. It comes from reaching out across divides, building bridges instead of walls, and daring to imagine that those we fear might one day become those we build the future with. In the end, the Federation did not survive because of its ships or its protocols. It thrived because of its people. People who believed that cooperation was not a weakness but a strength, and that the true mark of a civilization was not how far it could reach into the stars, but how deeply it could connect with those it met along the way. And so the stars remained waiting, each one a promise that the work was not done but just beginning.